kick us off, Mike?
Sounds good. Well, welcome everyone to Will and I's favorite work day of the month, Beers with Engineers. We super appreciate you guys pivoting with us and joining us on a Wednesday this month. I know it's kind of a weird shift. We had some in-person training that we had to join tomorrow, and we didn't want to completely blow it off and do all that other stuff. So we figured, hey, we'll shift it a day. So it's really good to see so many people here. We were a little worried that some people might not join. So appreciate you joining us on this wonderful day. We are going to go ahead and click me forward, and I'll talk about the good old safe harbor uh, because ultimately today in particular we're going to talk about some stuff that is just newly releasing and some other things that are coming down the pipe, and we do this on a regular basis. We talk about things that are either not yet released or still being formed. So please understand that what we're talking about in a lot of those cases is not completely set in stone. So don't, you know, make purchasing decisions based on that, and don't get us all in trouble. Um, that being said, um, let's go ahead and talk as usual. It's our general, typical, informal agenda, right? We're going to go quickly through the slides, but going to talk primarily about the new capability for AWS SSM, and what that brings to the table for us. So let's talk about why we're here. So, Will and I saw a gap in the ServiceNow ecosystem around people talking about the cloud native capabilities within ServiceNow and talking to each other about their journeys and what they're doing and what they're working on. So ultimately, we felt like we needed to build a community for people to communicate about these things, but also to really get some deep dive technical knowledge and share it out with everybody. So we love doing this, and we're so very proud that you guys choose to join us every month. So let's talk about who we are. I am going on 30 years in tech, man. It's crazy to even talk about. I joke now that I have the gray in my beard to show for it, but actually the sides of my hair are getting even grayer, what there is of it. And general all around nerd. I like Kubernetes. I'm an ITOM specialist here at ServiceNow. And I love utilizing cloud technology and cloud capabilities in order to solve business problems in an intelligent fashion. Um, Play a lot of board games. I have four amazing children who keep me on my toes on a regular basis. And I train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as much as I possibly can. And today I have kind of an interesting beer choice. I've never seen one of these before. It's a two-can box instead of a bomber. And it's got like this kind of cyberpunk lady on the front. She's got like the gun leg, kind of like that Grindhouse movie. It's called the Colombiana. It is a rum barrel aged imperial stout with cherries and coconut. So really looking forward to this. I'm only going to drink one of the cans because that could be trouble.
Good call.
Will, over to you.
Thanks, Mike. Hey, everybody. Will Hallam. I'm an ITOM solution consultant as well. Around 3 decades in technology as well. Got the gray in my beard and everything. Lately focusing on IT operations management stuff. I came into ServiceNow, the company, by virtue of being a customer, and I had used ServiceNow to automate a lot of stuff at my previous job, and it made my life easier, my team's life easier. And so when an opportunity arose to help other people do that from within ServiceNow, I jumped at the chance. Just really enjoy automating stuff, taking some of the drudgery out of so many people's lives as IT practitioners. In my spare time, I enjoy hanging out with my family, play some pickup hockey, and enjoy a video game or two. Today, I'll be enjoying a Little Sip IPA from Lawson's Finest Liquids. brewery who has a location in my hometown of Stratford, Connecticut. So I thought that was kind of cool. I live in upstate New York now, so I don't necessarily see a lot of beers coming from Connecticut at my local market. So that was kind of a cool find for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I actually forgot to mention these guys are from down your way, Mike. They're from Fort Worth, Texas.
Nice.
Yeah.
So a quick plug in the news and updates section. We now have we've developed a new hands-on live lab environment around one of our capabilities, which is called Health Log Analytics, or HLA. And because of the extra resources that HLA uses in the ServiceNow data center, it's historically been something that's been very difficult for folks to actually kick the tires on, because to get it, you can't just install a plugin for your on your non-prod instance. For example, you've got to get additional components provisioned in the data center. And so it's been traditionally kind of hard for customers to really experience in any kind of true hands-on fashion. And so we've changed that this year. We have a lab environment which we can provision for up to about 30 people at a time. And so we're running a hands-on virtual workshop on October 8th in concert with our product management team. And so the link to register for that is here. You'll get access to these slides, so don't worry about trying to jot down this ridiculous lengthy URL. We'll get those slides out to you within a couple of days. But encourage folks who have any curiosity or interest in looking at the Health Log Analytics capability to register for this virtual workshop.
And I'm just gonna pause here because Will is being very underspoken about this process. He basically built that lab from scratch, and did a heck of a lot of work on building out that lab and the underpinnings on it. So please come join the lab and marvel at the awesome work that Will did.
It really, it tied in well with our cloud native focus that we have in the beers series, because the way they did it was they actually provision a small Kubernetes cluster and just spin up all the components as containerized workloads. So it was definitely a fun project, a lot of time and effort, but definitely gratifying to have something that we can deliver to customers and also use internally for enablement. Okay. So today what we're going to talk about is a new capability that came out as part of the Zurich platform release. And essentially what it does is it attacks a pain point that we've been hearing from customers and kind of experiencing ourselves as well when we try and set up demo environments for discovering AWS resident servers. And historically, that's been a challenge because unlike cloud discovery, where you're just making cloud API endpoints, you can discover all kinds of cloud stuff without having to open up a whole bunch of network traversal capabilities. But once you've got, in the case of AWS, once you've got all these EC2 instances, they're running an OS. If you want to discover those, then that's where kind of things tend to develop some friction, because of the fact you need to have a mid server that can communicate with those EC2s. And we've provided some relief over the years in the form of like agent client collector. And we had some ability to collect some basic host data using the service graph connector for AWS. And so what this does is it kind of takes that capability and just puts it on steroids, because the service graph connector approach was bespoke to Service Graph Connector. It was a completely standalone solution that leveraged the AWS Systems Manager agent, which a lot of our customers have told us over the years they are leveraging to manage those AWS resources. And it would use that agent to run commands and then parse the commands and feed that into IRE to populate CMDB. And it was great, a great advancement, and something that allowed a lot of customers to kind of shortcut, not have to go through all of the same level of rigor around setting up mids and establishing connectivity to all kinds of VPCs. The downside was, as I said, it was a bespoke solution. So there was automatically kind of this gap between what that could discover and what you could discover using the traditional pattern-based discovery that horizontal discovery provided. And so now we have the ability to run discovery patterns using the AWS SSM agent, which means you don't have to have a mid sitting on each VPC or able to route to each VPC, each subnet within that. You can actually, as long as you're at Zurich patch 1 or higher, you can actually just use a single mid to then run discovery against the OS running on all of those cloud resources. Now in production, you probably want a little more than one mid for parallelism and all that good stuff, but you don't need to have all this like spider web of firewall rules and security group rules and everything that was previously required to take advantage of discovery patterns.
I actually just had a conversation with a customer last week that had north of 60 mid servers in their AWS environment
Yeah.
because of that requirement with the traversal rules and the various different firewall capabilities. And so, that was a necessary issue that cropped up as a result of the architecture. So this capability is really going to help streamline some of those.
Yep. Just a quick housekeeping for folks who haven't been on the series before. Feel free to either come off mute or raise your hand or use the Q&A or the chat, whatever you're comfortable with as far as your favorite way to interject with any questions, or if there's something you want to get a little deeper into, feel free, don't be shy. So just kind of where is this available as far as versioning and plugin levels, etc. Like I said, it's Zurich and later. There is no backport. It's because it required platform level Java changes to make this happen. And so you can't just install the latest store app on Yokohama or Xanadu. You do need Zurich and later. It has been available since patch 0, but really, honestly, in production, most people probably aren't going to start doing Zurich until patch 2 or 3 anyway. But just FYI, the full feature set, including like the ability to do the assume role capability and take advantage of the double hop assume role, that's kind of best practice from a cloud discovery perspective, that requires patch 1. So definitely want to be at Zurich patch 1. For anything other than kind of dipping your toe into trying this out. And then the minimum plugin version requirements are captured here. Again, you'll get copies of these slides, so you can don't feel obligated to be jotting this down furiously or taking a screenshot unless you're super anxious. And I did check, and it is supported in GovCloud environments. So a lot of times in the past, we've had little kind of asterisks or whatever for regulated environments where they're using those special government cloud. This is supported there. It's based on the cloud service account. And so since we added the ability to customize the endpoint, the API endpoint for your clouds at the cloud service account level, it just piggybacks on that. And it's fully supported running in a government AWS environment. Okay, so what's involved in getting this going? There's good documentation on the main doc page for setting this up, as well as a supplemental support KB, which is actually linked directly from the doc page as well. There's links to both of those things in the slides for your convenience. And in general, what it involves is it requires some specific IAM permissions to be attached to the mid server and as well as the managed EC2 instances, because that's basically how systems manager works. is it gives the mid server the permission to make calls out to systems manager. And then once systems manager does its work, in order for it to kind of send that output somewhere, then it needs permission to send that output to, in our case, to an S3 bucket. And so there's detailed instructions as far as what permissions there are. It talks about specific granular permissions. So if there are already IAM roles assigned to these EC2 boxes, they can just get some additional policy code added to them, which gives them the permission to do what they need to do to support this discovery mechanism. There's also out of the box AWS roles that can just get attached that give them the most of the required permissions. The one that does generally is going to require something, a few snippets of custom permission code is the S3 bucket, because part of the setup is you'll set up an S3 bucket. And in general, those EC2 instance roles aren't going to just have carte blanche to like write out to S3, right? So that's what I would anticipate is going to be the one piece that, even if you're using out of the box kind of AWS policies, you may need to add, attach a bit of special policy code so that it can read and write to that S3 bucket. We do recommend, so we have the ability of passing applicative credentials. So in other words, if you're doing discovery, you discover a MySQL database running, and you want to pull back data from within that database, like the list of tables, the schemas. There's some stuff that the pattern does using the MySQL client if it's provided with credentials to do that. And so in order to make sure those credentials are protected, this process will encrypt them using a KMS key within AWS. And best practice is create your own. Don't just use an off-the-shelf AWS KMS key to encrypt that. And so that's why it says here that if you're using applicative creds, a KMS key should be created. And then I've already kind of touched on the fact we're talking an EC2 instance profile, S3 bucket, and you do need a mid. This isn't like Service Graph Connector. It does need a mid, because basically what we did is we just added some code to the piece of the mid server that normally would be making an SSH or a PowerShell call. We just added kind of a third branch where it instead it sends the command it wants to run to Systems Manager. So here's how it works at a high level. So when you kick off a discovery schedule, when you kick off cloud discovery, it's one of the things it's discovering is a list of servers or EC2 instances with server OSs that are managed by Systems Manager. And that gets populated in the CMDB. And then when you set up your cloud discovery, you've got the option of saying, yeah, after this schedule runs, I want to discover VMs. And historically, that would be, after you've got all your horizontal stuff or your agent client collector agents distributed. But now what will happen is the schedule, if the schedule has the SSM flag enabled on it to discover those VMs, it will dynamically compile a list of, give me all of the server hosts that are managed by SSM in this environment, and then it'll march down those and run the appropriate discovery patterns in each of those managed agents. And so it does that by, instead of the command being sent from the pattern to the host via SSH or PowerShell, Windows remoting, it sends it via an SSM call. And so the Systems Manager agent will take that work, execute the command, collect the output, and then it'll send it to an S3 bucket. And it's, the S3 bucket is structured so that it's got some folders, and then it's got a file with a name that gets parsed in so we know which server it's coming from and what command it is. And that contains the output. The output is then sent back via the ECC queue as if it were just regular discovery content. And then over here on the left side, this is what'll happen if you've got the setup in place for applicative credentials. So like I said, if it hits a MySQL database and says, well, I can get some data out of this database for the CMDB if I have credentials, then it will take that credential, the mid server will encrypt it using the customer owned key and put that in what's called the parameter store within Systems Manager. And then when it executes the command, not only is it saying here's the command string, but it says, hey, here are the encrypted credentials to also pull out of the credential store. And then those credentials will get pulled out, decrypted, used, and they're basically encrypted up until the very last minute when they're actually passed through the to whatever the command line they're being used for is. Let's see. Dave put something in chat. Is there any way for the SSM pattern to determine if the EC2 instance is elastic? So I'm guessing by elastic, you mean kind of like an ephemeral instance. I mean, it's just running the standard. If it shows a Linux box, it's going to run the standard Linux host pattern, and the same for Windows. So off the top of my head, other than the is virtual flag, I'm not sure if there's something that inherently identifies that something's like a short lifetime resource. I don't know. What do you think, Mike? I'm thinking it would probably be, if you wanted to handle that special, you'd probably be better off just applying some kind of CMDB policy so that once it's in the CMDB, maybe you do something special with it. You could, I mean, it's just running patterns. So that's the nice thing, is you can tweak patterns as well. If you want the handling to be different based on, the flavor of the host. But I don't know of anything out of the box necessarily that's gonna do that. I will say that if you've got, this is going to work with event-driven discovery. So if you've got something that's short-lived, it's going to get cleaned up. If you've got event-driven discovery in place in AWS, that thing's going to get marked as terminated, within a few minutes.
Yeah.
And so as far as, you're not, if you've got that in place, you're not going to get a bunch of, EC2s that show as existing and being active when they've already kind of done their work and retired.
Yeah.
So,
and I think the API calls should be able to know when something is elastic based on the data that's coming back from the AWS API, like when we do the original, even before we get into the SSM piece, right? So the question really becomes, how do we flag that at that level, and understand that there before we even get into the SSM component? But 100% the event-driven piece is really, in my opinion, the right way to go, because ultimately you get the data quickly when it gets spun up, and then it gets retired quickly when it gets spun down, right? So all of those things enable the expansion and contraction of the data, and at the very least you have it in the CMDB to show that this was a thing that existed at a period of time and had access to these kinds of things.
and the nice thing, actually, kind of a side benefit, I don't know that it was necessarily the focus of developing this capability, but the nice thing is, because you're going through Systems Manager, if that thing gets discovered, and then by the time Systems Manager, the host level discovery kicks off, it's been retired. Systems Manager is going to know it's no longer there, and you're not going to waste your time trying to do a bunch of SSH commands for something that already got spun down. It's just going to bypass it. So that's actually an added benefit of using the SSM approach, is it's more tightly coupled into your standard AWS operating pipelines. And so if something drops off, there's less of a concern that it's like, you're just going to waste resources trying to discover something that's already done its thing and gone away.
Yep. Good question. Anything else? All right.
Looks like we are good. Okay, so just some highlights as far as, obviously this isn't it's a completely different facility versus horizontal discovery, so there are some caveats. It does run slower than agentless or agent client collector, and that's really just because there's a few more hops involved. Every command, instead of just executing the command and providing that output directly back to the ECC queue, it's got to execute the command, upload the output to the S3 bucket. Then the platform needs to tell the mid server, okay, retrieve the result, kind of spin and look for the results to show up in the S3 bucket. Then once they show up, retrieve the results in the form of an ECC queue payload. Um, so it is going to be slower. I haven't seen official, like an official document yet that calls it out specifically. I think that's going to be a bit of a moving target, just because depending on nothing's going to be typical. Discovery is dynamic, and depending on what it discovers, and that determines what additional patterns it's going to try and run. I will say that, when I did just kind of a seat of the pants test, something that takes like 30 seconds is going to take, for me, it took like 130 seconds to complete. But similar to regular discovery, it's a parallel operation. So it's not like just because talking to a single host takes that long, that it's going to immediately kind of exponentially increase the time based on a simple formula, because you can tweak the parallelism, and that's where kind of the number of mid servers required is going to enter into the conversation as well, so that you can fan that data out amongst multiple mids. And at its heart, AWS is a highly scalable platform. So I expect that's another nice thing, is you're just making AWS API calls, and AWS is doing the heavy lifting. So in terms of kind of the resources required on the mid server, if anything, it's going to be a little less, because it's not having these extensive TCP IP conversations via SSH or PowerShell, just saying, hey, run this command via an API call, which is generally going to be a lot more compact, a lot less chatty. But, clock time, at least in the small scale testing I've done, it does run slower. That's the trade-off, is you don't have to set up a bunch of mids and open up a bunch of firewall rules, but it will take longer to run. That's just kind of a known aspect of this approach. There are some traditional mid capabilities that are currently not supported, namely file-based discovery, certificate-based discovery, which I don't think that's really, we don't, when it comes to like, it's because that's done via a port probe. And so you don't have a mid on that network that can do a port probe anymore, right? So that's just kind of, it's just calling out a kind of a side effect of the fact that you're doing without that direct network connectivity. Top-down discovery is not currently supported. I believe that's on the roadmap. But so like if you're trying to do a top-down map, you'll probably get non-deterministic results. Top-down mapping uses patterns, so it will probably try and execute the patterns, and just some of it might succeed, but it hasn't been, that scenario hasn't been validated, not supported yet. Enhanced ADM. So enhanced ADM is where discovery will copy a little shell script or a little PowerShell script out to the target, which kind of runs in the background and collects those ephemeral network connections that are not long lived. And then the next discovery cycle, the output from that script gets collected. So that's currently not supported using this methodology.
Which is generally used as part of machine learning based discovery.
Yep.
Or excuse me, machine learning based service mapping,
Right.
right? Which my belief is tag based is going to be generally better in a cloud environment anyway. for most customer use cases. I think there's going to be use cases where ML service mapping is going to come in handy, but I totally get why they depref this as far as the development priority.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, we've had the ability for a while within AWS to ingest what are called VPC flow logs.
Yep.
And so I would say if you're really an AWS shop and you're interested in capturing really every single network connection that occurs, just go directly to the VPC flow logs and don't mess around with shell scripts that are running in the background.
Yeah,
Because
good
even
call.
that is kind of an imperfect approach. It's not running, it doesn't trigger based on a network connection. I think it runs every 10 seconds or something. So even with that advanced, enhanced ADM enabled, you may miss some of those connections. Where if you go to your VPC flow logs, you're not going to miss anything because that's just logging that takes place within AWS. If again, if you're focused on one of the use cases that can take advantage of that TCP data, like the machine learning service candidates. And then there's a primitive inside patterns, some discovery patterns to change to do a switch user, and that's not currently supported using this approach. You can specify what user the command runs as a mechanism to do that. But I'll be interested to start hearing from customers as to how often they would use that with SSM. Because the whole idea is that SSM is kind of this existing facility that's used to do other things to help them manage their AWS estate. I mean, SSM's got all these kind of off the shelf automations to do things like patch servers. And so the premise is generally that you're going to have this thing in place and it's going to be doing a lot more than just discovery. And it's just you're piggybacking on the fact that you're using this capability to manage your server footprint within AWS to then, without, setting up a whole bunch of bespoke special purpose infrastructure, get some good discovery data in as well. So the other caveat that I ran into is it does only support on Linux. It does only support sudo for privileged command execution, and because of the way the SSM stuff works, it defaults to the Bourne shell and doesn't support specifying an alternate shell because it's kind of just, like I said, it's just piggybacking off SSM. Misha's booing. Why are you booing, Misha?
We're a PB run squad here.
Oh, PB run. Yeah.
Yep.
That's great feedback. I will jot that down. And great feedback to funnel back through your account team as well. I haven't looked into how much privilege escalation is actually required using this approach, because SSM generally runs with some level of privilege anyway. And I think the main thing on the Linux side that privilege is needed for is DMID code, which I think there's other ways to get that identifying. It's that like pulls like the serial number, I think, which I think there's other ways to do that with an EC2 instance, because it's got that metadata service that can be hit to pull a bunch of metadata around the EC2 instance. So the pseudo support is, or, supporting other ways to escalate privilege should not stop you from getting a good amount of benefit from this in the meantime.
Is the
Just going forward, I
support-
think it's good to know what solutions customers are using out there, because really where it comes into play is when you want to start supporting top down, because that a lot of times, like, the app is running as a specific ID, and if you're not that ID, you're not able to get the data you need at the app level.
Yeah. Hold on, Mike. I want to hear your question, but before we do that, can if you're also a PB run shop, can you give me a +1 in the chat just so that we can kind of track how many folks? And then Mike, your question there.
I is the sudo support an SSM requirement? It seems like that's what SSM wants to use, right?
I that's my that was my kind of what I pictured when I saw this caveat in the docs.
Yeah.
But I didn't kind of pick apart the code to see if that was was correct.
So for the person that asked about PB run, are you running PB run in EC2 instances with SSM today?
So we don't have SSM enabled everywhere. We have a really weird setup going on here at our company, as I'm sure Will knows.
Yeah.
But we actually just recently we ran into an issue where we used all of our PB run licenses trying to discover our cloud infrastructure, which of course. So we actually brought up the conversation of pivoting to sudo, but our security team was really roadblocking us. So now they're just going to pony up. And so yeah, that's the position we're in right now. We don't
Yeah,
have a
the
service
only-
graph connector set up. We're doing a completely mid-server based approach.
Yeah, yeah. But the only reason I ask is my concern would be we can escalate it within us. But if it's a limitation of SSM, you have to understand that our patterns are being handed off to SSM
Absolutely.
and SSM running those
Yeah,
patterns.
yeah. There's only so much you can do. Yeah, I totally understand that.
Am I correct there, Will? That's my understanding.
Say that again, Michael.
It's SSM that's running the pattern. That's why that restriction is there.
Correct.
Yeah. So even if we try and make changes on our side, if it's an SSM restriction, it's still going to be in place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will definitely have to dig in more to that because I've for my kind of small scale testing and demonstration, I've always PB runs licensed, so I don't have the ability to play with it. So I've just done sudo, but I know we've got that privileged utility table that you can populate saying, oh, I'm going to use a different utility to escalate privilege. And I just don't know how that gets picked up in the pattern. It's probably, I'm guessing that because of the way the SSM works, essentially SSM has this API call called execute document. And a document is just a JSON or YAML payload that you load into your AWS account that lists, okay, here's the command I'm going to run. Here are the parameters. I'll accept that kind of stuff. So I'm guessing that it's probably maybe just for the sake of getting the MVP out the door. Maybe not, but I'm just, that's just a scenario that we run into sometimes where we say, all right, we're going to make it work with the 80% what people use. And then as far as extensifying it, that's not a word. As far as parameterizing
it is now.
We'll put that on the backlog and we'll handle that. So that's just kind of what I'm picturing, but I'm definitely gonna kind of dig into it, look at the code and see where that, where we're running into that, where it's where we made a point of documenting saying, it's going to use sudo to escalate privilege, and it's not currently something that's can be set with a property or whatever.
So sorry to take us down a rat hole. I just wanted to clarify where the issue was, right?
Yep. No worries.
Exactly what we're here for.
Yeah,
Thank you,
exactly.
guys.
That's what it's all about. A couple other things in chat. Let's see. Todd is saying as soon as it doesn't support discovery of firewalls installed on EC2, since those are typically found via port probe. Probably. The reason I say probably is because, for example, like we've got a pattern where if you hit a Docker host, it sees Docker running and then it runs commands to discover what is running within Docker. I just don't know if any of the patterns out there are currently looking for like a firewall process and will then use that to say, oh, there's a firewall here. If that's not the case, we don't have patterns that are able to say, oh, there's a firewall here by virtue of a running process, then yeah, your statement would be accurate. I suspect that is correct just because, yeah, traditionally a firewall would fall under kind of like a network type device and most likely discovered via a port probe. but definitely something worth looking into.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, you could make it happen because patterns are like, patterns are an open standard. You can certainly create your own patterns, and ServiceNow, our partners and our customers all do that if the benefit is there. So so it could be done at it's, but I suspect that it's probably not doing that out of the box.
Yeah, agreed.
Mark says, I thought we were mostly using sudo, but getting more Linux info for this Linux novice. Yeah, there's sudo. I mean, I worked at Bank of America a decade ago, and we were a big PB run shop just because, there's different advantages, disadvantages, free versus paid. But on the other hand, you can, rely on a vendor to support as opposed to just kind of being on your own. So, yeah, good for PB Run. They're still out there kicking. Todd just adds the additional detail that Palo Alto is an example, typically only via SNMP. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, but there's probably I bet if you just set a trigger based on a process name, it might be possible to it may not be a heavy lift, but TBD. I'm gonna look a little more into that. Okay, so I'm not going to run down through these properties, but these are properties that I discovered through looking at the docs, and the docs are being, it's a new product, it's a new capability. So the docs are being kind of probably updated as I speak, but I did compile a list of all the kind of key system and mid properties to be aware of when you're setting this up. It was a discovery process for me, so I'm hoping to help folks short circuit through that. That'll be in the slides. Two kind of features, I'll call them, that I discovered is with a CI you discover with SSM. If you go to that CI in the CMDB, you click that Discover Now related link. Today, it just launches the whole schedule. It doesn't just discover that one CI. I talked to the product team about it, and they said, yeah, that's something that they would look to address. They honestly had not tested it that way, because the way they had kind of foreseen or envisioned this being kicked off is you do your cloud discovery, and then that VM discovery schedule kicks off right after the cloud discovery. So they just hadn't really, or at least kind of the folks I talked to hadn't done what I did in my little test environment, which was I just want to discover one CI. And then the other thing I noticed is that right now, at least in my setup, it still runs this SSH terminal interactive command port-based SSH probe. And so that probe will fail unless you've got a mid that happens to be able to talk to every single EC2, which if you did, you probably wouldn't be looking at the solution. So it does throw an error, which can be ignored. I'm sure it's something that'll get cleaned up in subsequent releases, but first couple of times I saw it, I said, what's going on? So I looked into it, and that's the answer. It's just whatever that platform code is doing. It doesn't have a branch that tells it, oh, don't run that probe, even though I've got SSM enabled. So just to be aware of. All right. So, so just because we're almost up to 5, and Mike and I never stop at 5, but some people may have to go. Let me just give a quick pitch for next month's session before I terminate the slides. We've been doing this for over 3 years. It just so happened with vacations and stuff. Last month was our this month is our 36th installment of the webinar series, not including the live events and some of the one-offs. And so Mike had this idea. We've got 3 years of videos out on YouTube. We should do a little bit of a retrospective. So we are going to do kind of a clip show. I mean, it's not just going to be playing back videos. but it's just going to be an update on here's some of the stuff we introduced, some of the stuff we talked about over the last 36 months, and here's where that stuff is today. Here's hopefully how much better things are today
Right.
than they were over those preceding 3 years. So
I did find one thing that has gone away already. So
well, we did at least one light step
right.
oriented
I guess two.
session.
I guess
So
two.
that's two? Okay.
Yeah, right. So yeah, so the idea will be, hey, here's all the stuff that we've talked about. Here's how it's changed and what's kind of drifted in the past year and in the past 3 years. And my belief is the vast majority of stuff will be dramatically better. So looking forward to thinking about that and talking about that next month.
Yes. Okay. So now we'll kind of just walk through the setup and how it looks on the platform side, how it looks on the AWS side. So the first step that both our docs and that support KB that you'll see in the slides covers is just the basic setup. Make sure you've got systems manager working. And, in a lot of cases, the idea is enterprises already have this in place. So, you won't necessarily have to go through all of this, but this was just kind of the journey that I had to go through in setting it up. So I just want to share it all so that you kind of have at least a flavor for what the pieces are. And so the first piece is in Systems Manager within the AWS console. Make sure you've got at least some servers showing up in this node list. And if you don't, there's steps in the KB and the doc page that talk about essentially turning on Systems Manager. For a lot of you, that'll be something you just kind of send the link to your cloud team if they don't already have it set up, and maybe you're trying this in a sandbox or something. But we do, provide that. And that's kind of the first step. It's turning on Systems Manager. There's like an easy button that AWS gives you, which at least for like a sandbox environment should be fairly viable. That was what I did. But then I also had kind of some brownfield stuff. So I kind of did a bit of a hybrid approach where for the stuff that was kind of blank slate, I just did the easy button, but then I had other stuff running and that already had a IAM roles attached. So I took what was in the documentation, turned that into some additional policy code, just added it into my existing policies. So I've got a bunch of servers that SSM should be able to talk to. So that's good. And then if I just look at some of those EC2 instances, I can see whether they've got the right permissions associated with them. So I'll take this as an example. When I look at an EC2, it's got this IAM role, which should kind of populate once my browser makes the applicable AWS API calls, because it does have an instance profile. And actually, this is my mid server. So yeah, so it's got an IAM role called SN-mid. And the documentation does split what's required between the mid server. And so I set my mid up with an assume role model. The documentation does also cover if for some reason you need to do kind of the older approach with API keys or, kind of more hard credentials. We do cover that. It's still supported. It's just not best practice. The assumed role approach is definitely what we kind of champion when we talk to customers about how to set up their AWS discovery. I mean, that's really one of the benefits of using the mid with an assumed role is you don't have to manage credentials and everything's a lot, when there's no credential to use, then you don't have to worry about that credential being encrypted and it just kind of takes a lot of the rigor out of the whole thing. And so I've got a couple policies attached here. The SSM managed instance core, that's right out of our doc, is a great out of the box policy that you can attach. They also provide for EC2 boxes that don't have any role attached already, where there's out of the box AWS roles that you can just go ahead and attach as well. And so all I had to do was basically just add this additional code that allowed it to do two things. One is to update, to push and pull data into and out of the S3 bucket that contains all the output, and then encrypt and decrypt the applicative credentials using my custom KMS key that I created. And that's the ARN for that right there. So I've got SSM turned on. I've got my permissions instantiated. The documentation basically calls out that you should do that all via CloudFormation stacks or stack sets. Stack sets are just a mechanism for automatically propagating CloudFormation stack when new sub accounts get onboarded. Just gives you a centralized point to manage that and make sure that once you set these permissions that you're going to assign, they can very easily be deployed across as many AWS accounts as you want. And so now if I look at my discovery schedule, and this is one of those kind of platform level changes that was required, and a reason that we can't just provide this to previous platform releases via a store app. So I've got these two schedules that are kind of attached at the hip. I've got AWS 1, which is my cloud discovery schedule. And then I've got AWS 1 VM schedule, which gets created automatically when you go through the cloud discovery workspace and set up a cloud discovery schedule. It's got a little checkbox saying, do you want to discover your VMs after this runs? Yes or no? And if you click yes, then it creates one of these schedules. And what you notice is we've got this new field here called discovery agent. And we've got that set to AWS SSM. And so that is what tells this discovery schedule. You're not going to be using a traditional IP range. You're going to be using the list of active SSM agents to create your list of IP addresses that you're going to hit. And then the other setup piece that's required is on there's a couple of those mid and system properties that are on that one slide that I shared. And let's see, so we'll take a look at those. See, and also going to look at the mid servers. I'll get both of these pages to load. Okay, so this one, I'll bring up the mid server. Okay. Okay, so if I look for SSM in my system properties, that will show me there's two properties that you need to set at the system level, and then there's some mid properties. So the mid properties that are set are identifying for applicative credentials, the key name and region to use to encrypt and decrypt them. This property is about setting, basically enabling this to run on Linux servers. It basically tells it that using the default SSM user ID, SSM agent runs by root as default is okay. That is configurable, and the docs cover that. So if SSM is running as some kind of a service account, that's perfectly fine. It'll support that. And then providing the bucket name and region that's containing our output that we need to kind of publish from the discovered host and then retrieve from the mid. And then we've got these two properties here, which basically turn this capability on. Enable SSM turns it on in general, and then enable, you can turn it on or off for Windows hosts via the enable windows. So give you a lot of kind of flexibility there, that if for whatever reason you need to have a boundary between OSs as far as which ones are using SSM, that's perfectly fine and configurable. So with all those pieces in place, when this schedule runs, it's kind of anticlimactic to look at, because it's going to look very much like a traditional discovery. As far as when you're looking at the discovery log, you'll see patterns being executed. You'll be seeing SSH commands being run, multi-probes running. It looks very much the same as a standard SSH or PowerShell based discovery. If I look at a pattern log, it will call out that it's using SSM. So from a debugging perspective, there is a lot of good data that you can find. Let's see if I look for my, let me just look at my database server, which is going to be 207. Okay, so I've got a database server running in an EC2, and so we can see not only did it execute the Linux server pattern, but it also executes the MySQL server pattern. So if I drill into that, see exactly what that did and what came back, I can see that, for example, when it came time to run the MySQL health report, and it's running, so that requires that it runs a MySQL command. And so we can see that it says right here that it's running instead of an SSH command, or, the prefix of AWS tells it that it's using the AWS SSM instead of SSH, and it's executing this command. And you can see that it's actually getting output back. So that was kind of my indication that it's successfully pulling in those MySQL applicative credentials. The whole encryption decryption is working, and it's actually getting the output back. And the same model is followed essentially for any pattern that gets executed. So if I look at the Linux server pattern execution, any command that it's running is going to be coming back via that systems manager agent capability.
It looks like it is coming back with the SSM command ID.
Yep.
That seems like a good way to be able to go back and look at what was
Yeah, when I was
done.
debugging this, that was super helpful, because it, and if you turn, like regular discovery, if you turn the verbosity up on the mid server, you see a lot of information, including that, like that command ID, which then, your cloud team can generally look at CloudTrail logs and kind of tie it back. So if you are running into like permission issues, that was, that was definitely something that I dealt with, like anything with AWS. Their permissions are so granular that, there was definitely some process of walking through and seeing, how far it got, where did it run into an error, and then add the requisite permission. honestly, I didn't have much of that here because I was running horizontal discovery to start, and then I just pivoted. So I did have most of my permissions that I needed, and then really was getting those properties enabled, and then just following the docs and attaching the requisite like S3. I did have like an S3 upload download permission issue initially because I didn't realize immediately that, oh yeah, the mid server needs to get to the S3 bucket too, not just the servers I'm discovering. So
Yep.
I did, but it called it right out. It said, hey, I can't get the data from S3, and it kind of shone a nice spotlight on the specific issue. But you can see just an example here where it's running. And so that's where the sudo is. So I'm guessing, yeah, there's probably something that's just, it doesn't have this parameterized yet, but I do have that as a takeaway to kind of look and get a little more detail. Also, I'll find out where on the roadmap adding additional kind of plugging into that existing privileged command hook that we have for regular discovery, and see where that falls on the roadmap. But that's really it. I mean, once it's going, I've been discovering this environment using SSM now for a couple of weeks, and it's been working rather well. Once I realized that one error that was showing up was just something I could ignore, it's been really good. Any other questions? I know we're a little past the top of the hour. Like I said, it doesn't usually stop Mike and myself, but any other on topic questions before we stop the recording, and then we can stop the recording and also field any kind of random Q&A that is on folks' minds as well.
What table does
table?
Mhm.
It's going to show up in the same table the same tables as if you ran a horizontal discovery. So if you've got multi-source enabled, all this data is going to show up in the multi-source table. So if you got multiple discovery sources, you can do the same thing with Class Manager, where you change your rules around, and that you see how that affects how the CI is represented in the CMDB. There's really, yeah, it's using all the same tables that a standard horizontal or agent-based discovery is going to leverage, because it's literally using exactly the same patterns. So if you look at a given pattern, it will have steps where it's like creating a CI, and that tells you right there what table it's hitting. And so
this is just a different method to feed the data into the IRE to get it deployed into the right tables within the CMDB.
Let's see. Would this SSM go in parallel with Cloud Discovery or Service Graph Connector? It depends on Cloud Discovery. So it won't get in the way if you've got Service Graph Connector running. You can run Service Graph Connector and Cloud Discovery at the same time. I can't think of a really good use case anymore where you'd want to do that. We're really, based on where Cloud Discovery is today, except if you're doing kind of a transition, I would say most folks are going to find all their needs are met via Cloud Discovery, and especially with this SSM based ability.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, there is no conflict, but just from an overhead perspective, and the fact that to use this, you do need to have Cloud Discovery as a prerequisite. So
the only main differentiator that I see between these two is with the SGC, you don't have to have a mid server, right? And with this Cloud Discovery plus SSM method, you do have to have a mid server.
You have to have a mid, but it doesn't have to live in AWS. That's
true.
That's been kind of, I think sometimes that's kind of an assumption that people make, just because a lot of times that's what happens is we need to discover AWS. Okay, we'll spin a mid up in AWS. That does make like the assume role a lot more seamless.
Mm-hmm.
AWS actually has a capability now called roles anywhere, IAM roles anywhere, that lets an on-prem VM assume an AWS role. I haven't
Wow.
played with it other than to read that they've got it. So I don't know whether there's any caveats with trying to use assume role with discovery for not with an on-prem roles anywhere setup, but they do have it.
Hmm.
And that was really the main caveat that would tend somebody to gravitate towards having AWS based mid just to discover their AWS cloud, because it's not a technical requirement. You would have to do something different with credentials, possibly, if depending on if there's any caveats with the role anywhere capability out of AWS. But that aside, you could use the same mid to discover Azure, GCP, AWS. It could be on-prem, could live in Azure, or it could live in GCP.
Yep.
It's just making API calls, and you can use that exact same mid to do this discovery. It doesn't need to sit on a VPC to discover servers anymore. Exclusive patterns, no, it's using, I would expect going forward, if there's any kind of weird like that change user thing, as they add support for stuff that doesn't work within patterns today, they'll probably just they'll just change the pattern so that it supports, kind of like what they did with ACC. I'm sure there's been slight tweaks to patterns so that to get over little speed bumps with running them through ACC, but it's all the same patterns, whether they're running through ACC, horizontal discovery, or SSM.
Yep.
Anything else around the topic du jour?
Other than to comment on our horrible stealing of French phrases. Okay, cool. Well, I think, oh wait, one more. Plan to move to cloud. What is the best suggested approach and cost? Um, oh, in terms of cost and ServiceNow maintenance. Oh, good question. So looking to get cloud infrastructure discovered, just kind of starting in that process, getting stuff deployed up there, want to make sure we have the right approach from not only a cost perspective, but also from a long-term, like technical debt and operational overhead perspective. Um, so tell me if that's an inaccurate summarization of your question. But as far as that's concerned, I think this seems like a really good approach, right? Discovery, cloud discovery plus these SSM patterns will enable you to get. I always think about discovery of cloud infrastructure in two levels, right? There's the API discovery, like what does the cloud provider know about at its kind of core API? What can we query from it? That is what we do with our traditional cloud discovery. And then there's the deep dive discovery of the individual operating systems that are running inside of the cloud provided infrastructure virtual machines, right? And so there's there's really only one way to do that API level discovery, right? That's cloud discovery at the API level. There's multiple ways to attack that deep dive discovery, and it's very much dependent upon what cloud provider that you're talking about and what capabilities we have within that cloud provider. So when we're talking about AWS, from what I'm seeing, this configuration for AWS seems to be the best of both worlds. It's streamlined, it's fairly resilient, and it does not require a whole ton of operational overhead in order to get this managed and maintained and deployed. I would say the one caveat to that is that we haven't touched on up to this point is cloud security teams tend to be a little bit touchy about giving stuff access to execute SSM commands on EC2 instances. So there's going to have to be a lot of upfront conversation around what this looks like, how the methodology will work, and get them comfortable about doing this. But beyond that, I think longer term operationally, this seems to be a more streamlined approach. I want to
Yeah, if
hear your
you're just
thoughts.
starting out planning to move to cloud or planning to get more into cloud, specifically AWS, well, so some of this is specific to AWS and some of it is not. Like Mike said, engage the cloud team and the cloud security team, if there's a separate one,
Immediately.
as soon as possible.
Yeah.
It's it goes so much smoother when you work collaboratively with them and say, okay, here are the options. What are the, what are the pros and cons of the different approaches from your perspective? What can we do? What controls do we need in place to make it happen? That kind of thing. The nice thing about anything that uses patterns is anybody who can log into the ServiceNow instance can look at what the pattern is doing. So when it makes those questions around, well, exactly what is it doing, a little easier, because you can say, well, here you go. You can just click through each of these and see what they're doing.
Yep.
And in today's world of generative AI, you can take the pattern code and in theory, feed that into whatever, Claude, ChatGPT, say, hey, what is this going to do? And produce a summary, an AI generated summary. The problem is, we haven't been able to do that just because the rate of change on that pattern code is so fast. We're turning these things out and releasing updates at least every quarter, sometimes, every month or two. And so historically, we haven't had the ability to just write a nice summary of here's everything that all of our discovery patterns do. But now with some of these new technical levers that we've got, it's pretty easy for a customer to do that if they need to satisfy an internal stakeholder. So yeah, just get them engaged. And, if you're just starting to move into AWS, if you don't already have an enterprise config management solution, like if you've got something that like we manage all our servers this way, then, maybe the SSM conversation would go differently. But from what we're hearing is a lot of customers who are in AWS are just leveraging that SSM capability because it's just built in. Like if you use an AWS image to start as the basis for your build, it's got that agent built into it. Worst case, you kind of bootstrap that agent, it phones home to AWS and AWS handles it from there, including things like auto updates and that kind of stuff. So it seems like SSM is a very attractive prospect for folks who are in AWS or thinking about moving to AWS. And then if you've already got that, because that's just a standard systems management agent, it's used for a lot of other things, patching servers, getting, installing unbundled products, troubleshooting, automated, so generally it's there to manage the servers anyway. Why not just take advantage of that and use that to populate CMDB, because there's no additional lift involved, really.
Couple of quick points to add on to that a little bit. You said in terms of cost, right? The subscription unit cost model is based on the number of things that you discover on a 90-day rolling average, however you discover them, right? So there's not really a cost differentiator from one methodology to another, right? So it's really more about your operational overhead of managing that discovery methodology long term, right? Now, that's not to say like, the Service Graph connector requires AWS config, right? And that an AWS config has its own cost model that is required for that.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So that's not a ServiceNow cost, right? But that's a cost that you should be aware of and be right. Whereas the cloud discovery plus SSM methodology, to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong here, but does not require AWS config. And so therefore that's a cost cutout that you could potentially look at.
There's one pattern that uses AWS config, and it's what I call the backstop pattern, where it basically pulls a list of cloud resources that don't have an existing kind of targeted pattern.
Yeah.
Which I have yet to encounter a customer that makes use of that.
Right.
Because if they really care about something, they're gonna generate they're just going to generate a pattern, or we will already have generated a pattern for it, because we've
Yeah.
got the rate of the proliferation of new AWS patterns or cloud patterns in general has really gone up with the advent of Gen AI, because we can offload a lot of that work to an AI pipeline.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't see any I haven't seen anybody who's needed to have AWS config running if they're doing pattern based cloud discovery.
Yeah.
And if they don't have it on, have the experienced any gaps in what they're trying to get out of cloud discovery.
Yep. The other comment that I would just quickly add on is, we said engage the cloud and cloud security teams early and often, right? But also, it's really good to put them on the phone with your service ops SE from the ServiceNow side of the house, so that we can kind of help lay out the potential options and provide the pros and cons, ultimately without you, the ServiceNow platform team owners, right? Like having to become a cloud expert, right? Part of what we do here on Beers with Engineers is impart a lot of that knowledge, and a lot of folks on here are highly knowledgeable on the cloud side of the house. That being said, that's, we have people that watch this on YouTube and other times, and so like I want to call out, like, we are here to help build that translation bridge at times between the cloud teams and the ServiceNow teams, so that we can get what's the best solution for your organization.
100%.
Yeah. Okay. So some of the AWS services don't have supported patterns. You do recommend creating custom patterns with Gen AI and demo or hands-on available. That's kind of what Will was talking about.
Yeah. So I would suggest, depending on your time criticality, I would suggest a double pronged approach. One, raise it to your account team. As I alluded to, there's some new AI based resources that our dev team has on this that generates cloud patterns. Like last quarter, maybe it was May, we released something like 20 new AWS patterns in a single store release, and that was largely enabled by um, by Gen AI generated code. So so that's kind of a standard pipeline. So and as you would expect, it's kind of driven by customer feedback and customer demand. So for any patterns where you're seeing there's a gap in what's out of the box, definitely set that up with your account team so they can feed that back to the product team. And then the other piece I would say is, yeah, you're definitely better off take an existing pattern and just duplicate it, because generally it's going to be like AWS metadata is largely very consistent.
Yep.
And what I've done in the past is just slightly change the API endpoint, the kind of the path portion of the API call, and I'm getting a payload, and then I just have to tweak the parsing. So that would be my suggestion, based on, like, if you're thinking strategically, I would just start with talking to the account team and see what they can come up with as far as, some kind of a guesstimate on a time frame. If your time constraint is tighter, then maybe do that, but also explore just at least creating somewhat of a stub pattern. If you've got AWS config in place, then maybe you use the backstop, where it's basically, you can just say, hey, I want to find out about resources of this type. And you just create a list of, these are the type of resources I want to grab. It'll pull that out of AWS config. It won't pull kind of that specific metadata around that specific resource. So depending on the level of detail you need, that may or may not be worthwhile, but you could explore that for sure if you've got AWS config recording enabled in your environment, which most places do, but some don't. So we kind of have to be able to accommodate both scenarios.
It's because it's not free, right? And those,
well, that's the thing, is it stores in S3. And if you've got a lot of change in your environment, then that S3 bucket can get a lot of data in it.
Yeah. And the other thing too is that backstop methodology drops it into like a generic cloud resources table, right? Like it's not dropping them in specific classes. So you
Correct.
kind of have to know where to go look for them and how to pull them up. So the other question that Mark had was around, is there kind of a must-have app that we should be looking at once you're past a single cloud provider, right? So, hey, we're only in AWS. Great. The AWS SGC is awesome. It's the bee's knees. But now we're going into Azure and GCP too. Like, what should we be thinking about as we kind of like standardize across multiple different platforms? I think my take on it is cloud discovery, API-based cloud discovery is like should be the foundation, regardless of whether you're whatever cloud you're going into, because that's a tried and true methodology. We've worked through it a bunch of different ways. There are places today where I feel like the Service Graph connectors and the cloud discovery patterns are not 100% on par with each other, um, but they're pretty darn close. So I would say standardize across on the pattern-based cloud discovery, and then where you need to think more deeply on a cloud provider by cloud provider basis is at that deep dive OS discovery and how can we get that data out? And those are going to be different methodologies based upon which cloud provider you're talking about.
Yeah, I
So,
agree. Cloud discovery should be kind of the first option that's explored. And then um, if there's some kind of a gap, then maybe look at something like Service Graph Connector. But really, Service Graph Connector was and well, basically where that fits is we've already got something that's compiling this data. We just want to kind of slurp it out of there and pull it into ServiceNow without having to kind of reinvent the wheel. And so that's the classic scenario for Service Graph connectors. Um, with the advancements that have been occurring with cloud discovery, it's getting much easier to set up, and the data you're getting out of it is just continuing to grow and grow and grow, such that that kind of playing field is becoming a lot more level as far as like the learning curve, the startup cost that historically was there for cloud discovery is really coming down to where it's pretty comparable to going with a Service Graph connector. And now in many areas, cloud discovery, as far as the data you're getting back, is surpassing the comparable Service Graph connectors. So I would definitely kind of lead off with cloud disco and then kind of see where the gaps are and see if there's something super compelling, in which
yeah.
case you do have Service Graph connectors as an option. We're all
Mhm.
always about options, sometimes too many options at ServiceNow. But yeah, the tea leaves are saying cloud discovery is definitely the way to go unless there's some big showstopper.
Yeah. So next question was about VMware Aria, which is the old what was it called? Anyway, it's the
Was
like
it was that vRealize?
yeah. It was part of the vRealize suite. And it was
Oh yeah, it had
yeah.
some.
Yeah. Anyway, so the newer Aria stuff is it's just a renaming of the vRealize suite, and one of the components in there is a cloud provisioning portal that enables you to provision, and it's basically like a front end catalog on the level of what we do on the like cloud account management type functionality, right? Or the cloud service catalog. It's probably more close of an analog. And we've had integrations with the vRealize suite for that vRealize kind of like cloud portal for a while, since before the ARIA rename. I have not, and so we did, and what it did was, hey, I'm deploying this stack within whatever cloud provider it is. I'm going to feed that data into the CMDB as kind of like stub CIs, and then I'm going to provide a method to go and targeted discover that particular component after it's been deployed. And that has been around for years and years and years. But I have not looked into it sort of post Broadcom acquisition and the transition over to the ARIA name. So I don't know where that lives today. I would be shocked if we haven't updated it and continued to support it. But sometimes things fall by the wayside, so don't take me as gospel on that one.
I am taking a note. We'll see what we can find out.
That's gonna drive me nuts now. I can't remember the name of it. I was a VMware TAM for a bunch of years, and this was one of the things that I supported. So I feel really old that I have forgotten now. Great questions. Any other questions on the SSM side of the house before we kind of shut down the recording? Okay.